James adjusted his tie for the third time in the last 10 minutes, his fingers fumbling slightly over the knot. It wasn't that he didn't know how to tie it. He'd done it 1,000 times, but tonight felt different. Tonight wasn't just another Friday night. Tonight was special. It was Lena's birthday, and he'd promised her something unforgettable. They'd been saving for months. Not for a car, not for a vacation, but for this. One perfect evening out. Life had been tight lately. Between rent, groceries, and the unexpected car repair that ate up half their emergency fund, splurging usually meant ordering takeout instead of cooking. But Lena had been working double shifts at the community health clinic, coming home exhausted but never complaining. She deserved more than leftovers and a card from the drugstore. She deserved to feel seen, celebrated, like the incredible woman she was. So James had scraped together every spare dollar, skipped lunches, even sold a few old video games online. He'd heard about Elysium from a coworker, a rooftop lounge perched high above the city, known for its glittering skyline views, craft cocktails that cost more than his weekly coffee budget, and an atmosphere so exclusive most people only saw it in magazine photos. Getting in wasn't easy. Reservations filled up weeks in advance, and walk-ins, forget it. But James had called every day for 2 weeks straight, polite but persistent, until finally a cancellation opened up. He booked it instantly, his heart pounding like he'd won the lottery. Now, standing outside the sleek, understated entrance, no flashy sign, just a discreet brass plaque with the name Elysium etched in clean lines. He took a deep breath. The city hummed below them, a river of headlights and distant sirens, but up here, near the top of this gleaming tower, everything felt hushed, almost sacred. Lena stood beside him, her hand tucked into the crook of his elbow. She wore a simple emerald green dress that made her eyes sparkle, her hair pulled back in a loose twist. She looked nervous too, but also radiant. "You sure about this?" she asked softly, glancing up at him. "It's a lot." "It's your birthday," he said, squeezing her hand. "And you're worth every penny." She smiled, that warm, quiet smile that always made his chest feel tight in the best way. "Okay, let's do it." The bouncer at the door gave them a quick once-over. James in his slightly too stiff button-down and dark slacks, Lena in her dress, and nodded them through without a word. Inside, the air changed instantly. Cool, scented lightly with something woody and expensive, and filled with the low thrum of conversation and smooth jazz. The lighting was dim but strategic, highlighting polished wood, plush velvet banquettes, and gleaming glass. People were dressed impeccably, sipping drinks that looked like works of art, laughing in that easy, unhurried way that comes from not worrying about the bill. James felt a flicker of doubt. Were they underdressed? Out of place? He straightened his shoulders, reminding himself they'd earned this. They belonged here just as much as anyone else. They approached the hostess stand, a curved slab of black marble where a woman in a tailored black dress stood with a tablet. She looked up, her expression professional but not unkind. "Reservation?" she asked. "Carter," James said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We have a reservation for 2. 7 o'clock. She tapped on her screen, her brow furrowing slightly. Carter, she scrolled. "I'm sorry, but I don't see it." James's stomach dropped. "That can't be right. I called 2 weeks ago. Confirmed it yesterday." She checked again, slower this time. There was a cancellation today, but it was rebooked almost immediately. Corporate event. Very last minute." She looked genuinely apologetic. "I'm so sorry. We're completely full tonight." Lena's face fell just a little. James saw it, the disappointment quickly masked by her usual grace, but it cut him deep. He'd promised her this. He couldn't let it end like this, standing awkwardly in the lobby while she tried to pretend it was okay. "Is there any chance?" he pressed gently. "Even a small table?" "We don't mind waiting. We'll take anything." The hostess hesitated, glancing around the packed room. Her eyes landed on a particular spot near the floor-to-ceiling windows. The best spot in the house, really. A semicircular VIP booth, elevated slightly on a platform, draped in deep burgundy velvet with its own dedicated server station nearby. It was empty. Perfectly set, 2 crystal glasses gleaming, but no guests. "That table," she said slowly, "is reserved. Very reserved. For a specific guest. He's usually here by now, but..." She checked her watch. "He hasn't arrived yet, and he hasn't called." James followed her gaze. The table looked like something out of a movie. Intimate, luxurious, with the entire city spread out below like a jeweled carpet. It was exactly the kind of spot he'd imagined for Lena's birthday toast. Is there any chance? He started again, hope flickering back to life. If he's not here, maybe just for a little while, until he arrives, we'd be out of there in a second if he shows. The hostess bit her lip. She looked torn. On one hand, protocol. On the other, two clearly well-meaning people who'd clearly saved up for this, looking so hopeful. She glanced toward the manager, a tall man in a sharp suit observing from near the bar. He gave a barely perceptible nod. All right, she said, lowering her voice slightly. But just until he arrives. And the moment he walks in, you'll need to move immediately. No questions. Understood? Absolutely, James said, relief washing over him so strongly he almost sagged. Thank you. Seriously, thank you. She led them through the maze of tables, past groups of laughing professionals and couples leaning close in conversation. James felt dozens of eyes on them, curious, maybe even judgmental, but he kept his focus on Lena, who was now smiling again, her eyes wide with wonder as they approached the booth. Oh, James, she breathed as they slid into the plush seats. This is incredible, it really was. From this vantage point, the city wasn't just visible. It felt like it was theirs. Skyscrapers glittered like scattered diamonds, the river snaked through the darkness, and the whole scene was framed by the clean lines of the window. The booth itself was deeply comfortable, the velvet soft against Lena's dress. A small flickering candle sat in the center of the table, casting a warm, intimate glow. A server appeared almost instantly, as if summoned by their presence. Welcome. Can I start you with drinks? James, feeling a surge of confidence now that they were seated in this magical spot, ordered 2 of the signature cocktails he'd read about online, something with elderflower and gin, served in coupe glasses. He also ordered a small plate of truffle arancini, remembering Lena loved anything with truffle. As the server walked away, Lena reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You did it, she said, her eyes shining. This is perfect. He grinned, the earlier anxiety melting away. Happy birthday, love. They clinked their water glasses while they waited for the cocktails, laughing about the near miss at the door, about how James had practiced his fancy restaurant voice in the car on the way over. They talked about small things, the funny patient Lena had seen that week, the ridiculous plot twist in the show they were binging, James's boss's new obsession with office plants. It was easy, comfortable, the way their best conversations always were. For a little while, the cost, the exclusivity, the fact that they were technically sitting in someone else's reserved spot, it all faded into the background. It was just them celebrating, feeling lucky and connected. The cocktails arrived, looking even more beautiful than the photos, delicate, shimmering, garnished with edible flowers. They took sips, making exaggerated wow faces at each other. The arancini were crispy and rich, the truffle aroma intoxicating. James ordered another round, feeling generous, celebratory. He even managed to relax into the plush seat, letting the smooth jazz and the low hum of the room wash over him. This was worth every sacrificed lunch, every skipped coffee run. Seeing Lena's relaxed, happy face was everything. They were deep in a story about James, trying to assemble a bookshelf from one of those impossible flat-pack stores, complete with sound effects and dramatic reenactments. When the atmosphere in the lounge shifted, it wasn't sudden, not exactly, more like a ripple moving outward from the entrance. The low murmur of conversation dipped just slightly. A few heads turned. The music seemed to soften, though James wasn't sure if that was real or just his perception. He glanced toward the door, expecting maybe a celebrity or someone in an outrageous outfit. Instead, a man walked in. He wasn't flashy. No loud suit, no entourage. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, no tie. His posture was straight but not stiff, his stride calm and unhurried. He moved through the room with a quiet certainty that drew attention without demanding it. People didn't gawk. They just noticed. Staff members near the bar straightened up subtly. The manager James had seen earlier stepped forward immediately, meeting the man halfway with a respectful nod. James watched, curious. There was something about the man's presence, a kind of stillness, a weight, that made the air feel different. He wasn't young, but not old either. Maybe late 40s? His skin was a deep, rich brown, his hair close-cropped and salted with gray at the temples. His face was calm, observant, taking in the room without seeming to search. And then he turned. His gaze swept across the lounge, landing directly on the VIP booth, the booth where James and Lena were sitting. James's stomach clenched. Oh no. The man's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. He said something quiet to the manager, who glanced nervously toward James and Lena's table, then back at the man, nodding quickly. The man started walking toward them. James's heart hammered against his ribs. He looked at Lena, who had also gone quiet, sensing the shift. Her smile had faded, replaced by a look of dawning apprehension. He's coming, James whispered, his earlier confidence evaporating. The man stopped at the edge of their platform. He didn't loom, but his presence filled the space. He looked at James, then at Lena, his expression unreadable. Polite but distant. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was calm, deep, and carried effortlessly over the quiet jazz. "That's my table." James scrambled to his feet, nearly knocking over his cocktail glass. Oh, I'm so sorry," we were told. The hostess said, "We could sit here just until you arrived." He fumbled for words, his face burning. "We'll move right away, immediately, really sorry." He reached for Lena's hand to help her up, his mind racing. Where would they go? Would they even let them stay in the lounge? The embarrassment was crushing. All that effort, that perfect moment, ruined because they'd taken the wrong seat. The man watched him for a second, his eyes taking in James's flustered apology, Lena's wide, apologetic eyes. Then, just as James was about to step down from the platform, the man spoke again. His voice was still calm, but there was a new layer to it now, a quiet authority that seemed to settle over the entire room. The nearby conversations had stopped. People were watching, listening. "I own this place," he said. The words weren't shouted. They weren't angry, but they landed like a stone dropped into still water. Silence spread outward from their table. The jazz felt too loud suddenly, then too quiet. James froze, his hand still outstretched toward Lena. Lena's breath caught audibly. The man, the owner, stood there looking at them. Not with anger, not with amusement, but with a kind of weary understanding. He'd seen this before, James realized with a sinking feeling. He'd seen people assume, judge, make mistakes based on what they saw, or more accurately, what they didn't see. James's mind reeled. He owned Elysium? This entire impossibly chic exclusive space. The man standing before them, who looked like he could be anyone, a professor, a doctor, a businessman, was the billionaire behind it all? The thought hadn't even crossed James's mind when they sat down. He'd assumed the owner would be. Well, he wasn't sure what he'd assumed, but it hadn't been this, and that realization, sharp and sudden, cut deeper than the embarrassment of taking the wrong table. It was the realization of his own blind spot, his own unexamined assumption. He opened his mouth to apologize again, to say something, anything, but no words came out. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, filled only by the distant hum of the city far below and the frantic beating of James's own heart. Lena squeezed his hand tightly under the table, her knuckles white. The owner didn't move. He just waited, his calm gaze holding them both, as the weight of his simple statement, "I own this place," settled over James and Lena, and over the entire, suddenly very quiet lounge. The silence didn't just hang in the air, it pressed down on them, thick and heavy, like a blanket soaked in cold water. James stood frozen, one foot still on the plush step of the VIP platform, his hand half raised as if he could somehow undo the last 30 seconds. Lena sat perfectly still, her eyes wide, her fingers gripping the edge of the velvet seat so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Around them, the lounge seemed to hold its breath. Conversations had stopped mid-sentence. Glasses hovered halfway to lips. Even the jazz music from the corner trio felt like it had dipped into a lower, more cautious register. The man, the owner, didn't move. He just stood there, calm as still water, his gaze steady on the two of them. There was no anger in his eyes, no smugness, not even impatience. Just a quiet kind of knowing, like he'd seen this exact moment play out before. Maybe dozens of times, and it never surprised him. Only saddened him a little. James finally found his voice, though it came out rough, shaky. I didn't know," he stammered. "We were told it was okay to sit here until you arrived. We didn't mean any disrespect. We'll go right now." He turned to Lena, his face burning. Come on, let's... But before Lena could stand, the man raised a hand slightly, not to stop them, but to pause the rush. It's all right, he said, his voice low but clear. Sit, James blinked. Sir? Sit, the man repeated, softer this time. He glanced around the room, and James noticed how the other guests quickly looked away, suddenly very interested in their drinks or their companions. The staff, too, melted back into the background, though their eyes kept flicking toward the VIP booth with nervous curiosity. The man stepped up onto the platform, not invading their space but claiming his own. He didn't sit at the table yet, but stood beside it, his hands loosely clasped in front of him. He looked out at the city for a long moment, the lights reflecting in his eyes. Then he turned back to them. It's your wife's birthday, he said. James and Lena exchanged a startled glance. How did he know that? He must have seen their confusion, because a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. I heard you toasting earlier. To my favorite person on her favorite day? He nodded toward Lena. Happy birthday. Lena's eyes filled with tears, not from fear now, but from something else entirely. Relief, shame, gratitude? She swallowed hard and managed a small, trembling smile. Thank you. The man turned to James. You saved up for this, didn't you? James nodded, unable to speak. It felt strange, almost surreal, to be seen so clearly by someone who, minutes ago, was just a stranger walking through a door. Good, the man said simply. Then he turned and signaled to a server who had been hovering nearby, trying not to look like he was eavesdropping. Bring another round of what they're having. And the truffle arancini again. And he paused, thinking, the chocolate soufflé. 2 of them, and put it all on the house. The server nodded quickly and hurried off. James's mouth opened, then closed. You don't have to do that, he said weakly. I know, the man replied, but I want to. He finally sat down, not across from them, but at the far end of the curved booth, giving them space while still being part of the moment. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and leaned back slightly, his posture relaxing just a fraction. I get it, he said after a beat, his voice quieter now. Meant just for them. People see this place, the view, the price tags, the way folks dress, and they make assumptions. About who belongs here, about who could possibly own it. He looked down at his own hands for a moment, then back up. I've walked into my own hotels and been asked if I was the maintenance guy. I've shown up to board meetings in my own companies and had security stop me at the door. Last year, at a charity gala I helped fund, someone asked if I was the valet. He said it without bitterness, just stating facts like someone describing the weather, but James felt the weight of every word. He thought about how, when they first saw the empty VIP table, he'd never once questioned whether the person it was reserved for might look like this man. He'd just assumed, without even realizing he was assuming, that the owner would be someone else, older maybe, whiter, someone who fit the picture in his head of what a billionaire looked like. The shame hit him like a wave, hot and sudden. It wasn't malicious, he told himself. He wasn't a bad person, but that didn't make it hurt less. To realize he'd carried that bias inside him, quiet and unexamined until this very moment. I'm sorry, James said, and this time, it wasn't just about the table. It was deeper. I didn't think. The man held up a hand again. You don't need to apologize for that. Not to me, just notice it. That's enough. Lena reached across the table and gently touched James's arm, her eyes soft with understanding. She knew him. She knew he hadn't meant harm, but she also knew, like he did now, that good intentions don't erase blind spots. The server returned with their drinks and food, setting everything down with careful precision. The new cocktails sparkled under the low light. The arancini steamed faintly, and the soufflés, tall, delicate, dusted with powdered sugar, looked like something from a dream. Eat, the man said gently. It's your night. James hesitated, then picked up his glass. He raised it slightly. To you, he said, and thank you. The man gave a small nod and lifted his own water glass in return. They clinked softly, and for a moment the tension eased. They ate in quiet for a few minutes, the rich flavors of the food grounding them. The chocolate soufflé was warm and melting in the center. Perfect. Lena took small, appreciative bites, her earlier anxiety giving way to wonder. After a while, the man spoke again. What do you do? He asked James. I work in logistics, James said. Warehouse management mostly. Coordinating shipments, inventory, that kind of thing. The man's eyebrows lifted slightly. Logistics? Yeah, nothing glamorous, just keeping things moving. A thoughtful look crossed the man's face. You know, he said slowly, that's actually where I started. Not in a warehouse, but close. I was coding delivery routes for a small courier company, trying to make their system faster, cheaper, more efficient. That little algorithm I built? It saved them enough money that they gave me a tiny stake in the business. That stake became the seed for everything else. James stared at him. You started in logistics? Back. When people laughed at the idea of using data to optimize something as simple as package delivery. They said I was overcomplicating it. But I knew there was waste everywhere. Empty trucks driving back, inefficient routes, delays that cost money and trust. I just wanted to fix it. James leaned forward, suddenly engaged. That's exactly what I deal with every day. We're still using these clunky systems, half paper, half outdated software. Half the time I'm just guessing when a shipment will arrive because the tracking hasn't updated in 2 days. The man nodded. The industry's changed, but not enough. Too many companies still treat logistics like a cost center instead of a competitive advantage. He paused. You ever think about building something better? James laughed a little self-consciously. Me, I barely know how to code. I just manage what's there. But you understand the problems, the man said. That's the hard part. Anyone can learn to code, but to really see where the system breaks, that takes experience. That takes someone who's lived it. James didn't know what to say. No one had ever framed his job like that. As valuable insight, not just grunt work. The man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a simple black card. No name, no title, just a phone number and an email address printed in clean small font. He slid it across the table toward James. If you ever want to talk about it, about logistics, about systems, about building something, call that number. Ask for David, tell him I sent you. He'll set up a coffee. James picked up the card like it was made of glass. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, the man replied. That's enough for tonight. Lena spoke up then, her voice soft but clear. Why are you doing this? You didn't have to be kind. We took your table. We assumed things. The man looked at her for a long moment. Then he sighed just a little. Because someone once gave me a chance when I didn't deserve it, he said. I was 19 working nights at a gas station trying to pay for community college. A man pulled up in a car worth more than my neighborhood. He saw me studying between customers, calculus textbook open on the counter, and instead of ignoring me like everyone else, he asked what I was working on. We talked for 10 minutes. Then he handed me his card and said, if you ever want to see how the other half builds things, come by my office. He smiled faintly. I went, and that 10-minute conversation changed my life. He looked out the window again at the city lights stretching endlessly. Kindness isn't about deserving. It's about seeing someone, really seeing them. And sometimes, giving them a seat at the table even if it's technically yours. The words settled over them, quiet and powerful. Just then, the man's phone buzzed softly in his pocket. He glanced at it, then stood. I have to go, he said. Meeting in the morning. He looked at Lena. Happy birthday again, really. He turned to James. Don't lose that card. And with that, he stepped down from the platform and walked back through the lounge. This time people didn't stare. They just watched him go with a kind of quiet respect. He didn't look back. James and Lena sat in silence for a long time after he left, the city lights shimmering around them, the half-eaten souffle forgotten. Do you think... Lena started, then stopped. Do you think he really meant it? About the card? James looked down at the black rectangle in his hand. It felt heavier than it should. I think he meant every word. They stayed a little longer, not talking much, just absorbing the night, the near disaster, the unexpected grace, the strange, beautiful turn it had taken. When they finally left, the hostess at the door gave them a small, knowing smile, as if she too had witnessed something rare. Outside, the city air felt cooler, cleaner. James hailed a cab, and as they rode home, Lena rested her head on his shoulder. You know, she said quietly, tonight wasn't just about the fancy table or the free dessert. No, James agreed. It wasn't. It was about being seen. about assumptions cracking open, about the quiet power of a stranger who chose kindness over pride. And as the cab rolled through the sleeping streets, James held the black card in his pocket, not as a ticket to riches, but as a reminder. Sometimes, the most important tables aren't the ones with the best view, but the ones where you're truly welcome. The cab ride home felt longer than usual, but not in a bad way. It was like the city had slowed down just for them, giving them space to breathe after everything that had happened. James kept his arm around Lena, his fingers absently tracing the edge of the black card in his jacket pocket. It was still hard to believe it was real, that the man who owned the entire place had not only forgiven their mistake, but had actually sat with them, talked with them, even handed James something that felt like a key to a door he never knew existed. Lena was quiet, her head resting against his shoulder, but James could tell she was thinking. He knew that look, the slight furrow between her brows, the way her fingers tapped softly against her knee. She wasn't upset. She was processing. When they got back to their apartment, a modest one-bedroom on the third floor of a building that had seen better days, they didn't rush to turn on all the lights. James flicked on the small lamp by the couch, and Lena kicked off her heels with a soft sigh, sinking into the cushions. "He didn't have to do that," she said finally, her voice low. "Most people would have been furious, or at least embarrassed us in front of everyone." James sat beside her, pulling off his tie and loosening the top button of his shirt. "I know," he said. I kept waiting for him to say something sharp to make us feel small. But he didn't. He just saw us. Lena turned to look at him. "Do you think he knew what we were thinking?" When we sat down, James hesitated. He didn't want to admit it, but he couldn't lie to her. "Maybe not exactly," he said slowly. "But I think he's used to it. That look people give when they're surprised someone like him is in charge. I've seen it before on the news, in movies, even in our own neighborhood when a new business opens and people whisper, 'Who's really behind it?' Like success like that can't possibly come from someone who looks like him." Lena nodded. "I felt it too, James, not in a mean way, but I just assumed the owner would be older, or maybe European. I don't know. It's like my brain had a picture already drawn and he didn't match it." "That's the scary part," James said. "It wasn't even a thought I chose. It was just there, like background noise I never turned down." They sat in silence for a while, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. Outside, a car passed, its headlights sweeping across the ceiling like a slow wave. After a few minutes, Lena reached for his hand. "What are you going to do with the card?" James pulled it out and looked at it again. Plain, no logo, just a name, David, and a number. "I don't know," he admitted. "Part of me thinks it's too good to be true. Like, why would someone like that care about a guy who manages inventory in a warehouse?" "But he asked what you did," Lena reminded him gently. "He didn't just hand you the card out of pity. He listened. He remembered you work in logistics. He even said you understand the problems. That's valuable." James sighed. "It's just, what if I call and sound stupid? What if I waste his time? Or worse, what if I go and realize I'm completely out of my depth?" Lena squeezed his hand. "Then you learn. That's all anyone ever does. You don't have to be ready. You just have to show up." He looked at her, really looked at her. Her hair was coming loose from its twist, her makeup slightly smudged from the long night, but her eyes were clear and steady. She believed in him. Not in some grand, dramatic way, but in the quiet, everyday kind of belief that says, "You're capable, try." "Okay," he said finally. "I'll call. Not tomorrow. Not right away. But soon." The next few days passed in a blur of routine. James went back to work. Early mornings, long hours, the familiar rhythm of checking manifests, troubleshooting delayed shipments, calming frustrated clients. But something had shifted. He found himself noticing things he used to ignore. The inefficiency of the loading dock schedule, the outdated software that crashed every time they tried to generate a report, the way drivers wasted fuel idling because the system didn't give them real-time updates. He started jotting ideas in a small notebook he kept in his back pocket. Nothing fancy, just observations. Why can't we sync delivery times with traffic data? What if drivers could update status from their phones? Why do we print 3 copies of every invoice when everything's digital? At home, Lena noticed the change. He was quieter at dinner, but not distant, just thoughtful. Sometimes he'd ask her questions about how systems worked at the clinic, how they tracked patient records, how they scheduled appointments, how they handled emergencies. She'd explain and he'd nod, making mental connections. One evening, as they washed dishes together, Lena drying, James rinsing, he finally brought it up again. "I think I'm going to call," he said, scrubbing a plate harder than necessary. Lena didn't look surprised. "Good. I'm nervous, and that's okay. What if it's a mistake? What if it's not?" She countered gently. He looked at her. "You really think I should?" "I think you owe it to yourself to find out." So the next morning, before his shift started, James sat in his car in the parking lot, the engine off, the black card in his hand. His palms were sweaty. He took a deep breath, dialed the number, and waited. It rang twice. David speaking. The voice was calm, professional, but not cold. "Hi," James said, his voice cracking slightly. He cleared his throat. "My name is James Carter. I was at Elysium last weekend. The owner, he gave me your card. Said to tell you he sent me." There was a pause. Just a second. But it felt like an hour. "Oh," David said. And then, surprisingly, he chuckled softly. "Right, the birthday couple." James blinked. "You remember?" "I remember," David said. "He mentioned you. Said you had good instincts about logistics." Another pause. "Are you calling about the coffee?" "Yes," James said quickly. "If it's still, an option." "It is," David said. "How's Thursday at 10? There's a cafe near your part of town, the Roasted Bean. Quiet. Good coffee." James's heart jumped. "Yeah, Thursday at 10. I'll be there." "Great," David said. "See you then." The call ended. James sat in the car for a full minute, staring at the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. It was real. It was happening. Thursday morning came faster than he expected. James wore his best button down, the one Lena had ironed twice, and arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early. He ordered a black coffee and sat at a small table by the window, trying not to look like he was waiting for someone important. At exactly 10, a man walked in. Mid-40s, sharp-eyed, dressed in a dark sweater and jeans that probably cost more than James's entire outfit. He scanned the room, spotted James, and walked over with a warm, easy smile. "James?" he said, extending a hand. "Yeah, hi. David." They shook hands. David sat down, ordered a tea, and got right to it. "He doesn't do this often," David said, stirring his tea. "Hand out his personal contact. In fact, I can count on one hand how many times it's happened in the last 5 years." James didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. "He saw something in you," David continued. "Not just that you work in logistics, but that you see it. Most people in your position just complain about the system. You were already thinking about how to fix it." James shifted in his seat. "I don't know how to build software or anything, I just notice what's broken." "That's the first step," David said. "The hardest part isn't coding. It's understanding the problem deeply enough to solve it right." He leaned forward. "We're launching a new initiative, small teams under the radar focused on real-world logistics challenges. Not theoretical stuff. Actual pain points from people on the ground. Warehouse managers, dispatchers, drivers. We want to build tools that actually help, not just look good in a demo." James's pulse quickened. "And you want me to join?" "We want you to consult," David clarified. "Share your experience. Tell us what doesn't work, what would make your job easier, what keeps you up at night. We'll handle the tech side. But your insight? That's gold." James swallowed. "I'd have to keep my day job, at least at first." "Of course," David said. "This isn't about quitting. It's about contributing. We meet once a week, 2 hours, paid by the way. And if something you suggest gets built and used, there's a bonus structure." James almost laughed. "You're serious." "I'm very serious." They talked for another hour, about the industry, about James's current setup, about small ideas that could make a big difference. David took notes, asked questions, listened, really listened. When they parted ways, David handed James a small folder. "Read through this. It's an NDA and a basic agreement. No pressure. If you're in, sign it and email it back. If not, no hard feelings. James took the folder, his hands steady now. That night, he and Lena read through the documents together at the kitchen table. It was all straightforward. Confidentiality, scope of work, payment terms. Nothing shady, nothing that felt like a trap. "What do you think?" James asked. Lena looked up from the papers, her eyes bright. "I think it's a gift, James. Not because it's easy, but because it's real. He's not offering you a handout. He's offering you a seat at the table, as yourself." James nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's exactly it." The next morning, he signed the papers, scanned them, and hit send. A few hours later, an email came back. "Welcome aboard." The first team meeting was held in a sleek but unassuming office, downtown. Not in a high-rise, but in a converted warehouse space with exposed brick and big windows. There were 5 of them: James, 2 software developers, a data analyst, and a former truck driver named Rosa, who now ran a small regional delivery service. They sat in a circle, no hierarchy, no titles on name tags, just people who knew the work. The team lead, a woman named Priya, opened the meeting by saying, "We're not here to impress executives. We're here to solve real problems for real people. So tell us, what makes your job harder than it needs to be?" James took a breath and started talking. He told them about the paper manifests that got lost in the rain, about drivers showing up to warehouses only to find the loading bay double booked, about how impossible it was to track a package once it left the main hub. He spoke from experience, not theory, and as he talked, he saw nods. Rosa chimed in with her own stories. The developers asked sharp, practical questions. The data analyst scribbled furiously. For the first time in his career, James didn't feel like the guy at the bottom of the ladder. He felt like a partner. After the meeting, as he walked to his car, his phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "How'd it go?" He stared at it for a second, then smiled. "Better than I imagined. Thank you." He didn't get a reply. He didn't need one, because the real thank you wasn't in words. It was in the fact that someone had looked past the surface, seen his worth, and given him a chance, not out of charity, but out of respect. And that, more than any VIP table or free dessert, was the greatest gift of all. Weeks turned into months, and James's life settled into a new rhythm, one that still included early mornings at the warehouse, checking manifests and calming frustrated clients, but now also carried the quiet hum of something more. Every Thursday afternoon, he'd slip out a little early, change into a clean shirt in his car, and head to the converted warehouse office downtown. Those 2 hours became the highlight of his week, not because they were glamorous, but because for the first time, his voice mattered in a room full of people who actually listened. The project they were working on started small, a mobile app that let drivers update delivery statuses in real time using just their phones. No fancy hardware, no complicated logins. James had suggested it during the second meeting, remembering how many times he'd stood in the rain, trying to call a driver whose phone was dead or who was stuck in traffic with no way to tell anyone. The team loved it. They called it track flow, and James watched, amazed, as his idea, born from frustration and late-night shifts, began to take shape on screens and whiteboards. He wasn't coding, but he was shaping the design. "Make the button bigger," he'd say. "Drivers wear gloves, they can't tap tiny icons." Or, "Don't ask for a password every time, they're in and out of the cab all day." The developers didn't roll their eyes. They nodded, made notes, and adjusted. Rosa, the former trucker, backed him up every time. "He's right," she'd say. "Out there, you don't have time for fancy." At home, Lena noticed the change in him, not just the extra hours, but the lightness in his step, the way he'd talk through dinner about user interfaces and data syncs like they were normal dinner topics. She'd smile and ask questions even when she didn't understand half of it, because she saw how alive it made him feel. One evening, as they sat on the couch after a long day, Lena turned to him. "You're different," she said softly. James looked up from his notebook where he'd been sketching a new feature idea. "Different how?" "Like you found your place," she said. "Not just a job. A purpose. He didn't answer right away. He thought about the warehouse, the fluorescent lights, the constant beeping of forklifts, the smell of cardboard and diesel. He loved his team there, but it had always felt like a means to an end. Now, for the first time, he felt like he was part of something that could actually change things, not just for him, but for thousands of people doing the same work. "Yeah," he finally said, "I think I have." Then came the email. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, subject line simple: Track flow pilot. Go, no-go decision. James opened it with his heart in his throat. The pilot, the first real-world test of the app, was scheduled to launch in 3 weeks with a regional delivery company that handled medical supplies. If it worked, they'd roll it out to larger partners. If it failed, well, James didn't want to think about that. The email asked for final feedback from all team members. James spent his lunch break typing a response, detailed, practical, full of suggestions based on what he'd seen in the warehouse that morning. He hit send and went back to work, trying not to obsess over it. 2 days later, another email. This one was shorter. Pilot approved. Launch date confirmed. Great work, James. He read it 3 times before it sank in. They were really doing it. The launch day was chaotic in the best way. James wasn't on site, he still had his day job, but he got constant updates from Priya and Rosa, screenshots of drivers using the app, messages like, "First delivery updated in real time," and "No missed stops today." By mid-afternoon, the client called to say they'd never had a smoother day. That night, James came home exhausted but buzzing. Lena had made his favorite pasta and they ate at the kitchen table, the city lights twinkling outside their window. "We did it," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "You did it," she corrected gently. "No," he insisted. This wouldn't be happening if you hadn't pushed me to make that call." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I just reminded you that you're capable. You did the rest." A few weeks later, the team was invited to present TrackFlow at a small industry conference, a gathering of logistics managers, tech developers, and supply chain experts. It wasn't flashy, but it was respected. James was nervous. He'd never spoken in front of a crowd before, let alone one full of people who knew the industry inside and out. "You'll be fine," Priya told him during their prep call. "Just talk like you do in our meetings. Like you're explaining it to a friend," so that's what he did. Standing at the podium, looking out at a room of skeptical faces, James took a deep breath and began not with technical jargon, but with a story. "Last winter," he said, "I had a driver stuck on the highway for 3 hours because of an accident. His phone died. No one knew where he was. The package he was carrying? Insulin. By the time we found him, it was too late. The medication had been exposed to heat too long. It had to be thrown out." He paused. The room was silent. "That's when I realized the problem isn't the trucks or the roads. It's the silence between them. TrackFlow isn't about fancy tech. It's about breaking that silence." He walked them through the app, simple, intuitive, built for real conditions. He showed videos of drivers using it in rain and snow with gloves on. He shared stats from the pilot: 40% fewer missed deliveries, 60% faster response times when issues came up. When he finished, there was a beat of silence. Then applause. Not polite clapping, but real enthusiastic applause. Afterward, people came up to him. Managers, tech folks, even a few drivers who'd heard about the pilot. They asked questions, shared their own stories, thanked him. One older man, his hands rough from decades of work, clapped him on the shoulder and said, "You built this for us, didn't you?" James just nodded. "Yeah, I did." But the biggest surprise came a week after the conference. James was back at the warehouse sorting through a stack of shipping labels when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Again, he stepped into the break room and answered. "James," the voice said. It was calm, familiar, his breath caught. "Hi, I saw your talk," the man said. "You were good." James didn't know what to say. "Thank you. You spoke like someone who's been in the trenches. That's rare." "I just told the truth," James said. "That's the rarest thing of all." There was a pause. Then the man said, "I've been following TrackFlow. The pilot results are strong. The client loves it. But I wanted to hear it from you. Do you believe in it?" "More than anything," James said without hesitation. "Good," the man replied. Because we're scaling it nationwide starting next quarter. James's knees went weak. He leaned against the vending machine for support. Nationwide? Yes, and I want you involved. Not just as a consultant, but as a product lead. Part-time at first. You keep your current job if you want, but you'll help shape the rollout, train new teams, refine the features based on real feedback. James couldn't speak for a moment. This wasn't just a side project anymore. This was real. This was his. I'd be honored, he finally managed. Good, the man said again. David will send details. And James, yeah? Don't forget where this started. Not in a boardroom. In a booth on a birthday night with someone who just wanted to do right by his wife. James smiled. I won't. The call ended. He stood there for a long time, staring at his reflection in the vending machine glass. A man in a wrinkled work shirt, coffee stain on his sleeve, holding a phone like it was a lifeline. He thought about that night at Elysium, the panic, the shame, the quiet dignity of the man who owned the place. He hadn't just given James a table, he'd given him a mirror. And in that mirror, James had seen not just his mistake, but his potential. That evening, he told Lena everything over takeout pizza on the couch. She listened quietly, her eyes shining. When he finished, she didn't cheer or jump up. She just reached over and took his hand. You know what's beautiful about this? She said. What? That it all started because you wanted to give me a good birthday, she said softly. Not for fame, not for money. Just because you love me. James felt his throat tighten. He pulled her close. Yeah, he whispered. That's all it was. And in that moment, he realized the truth. The greatest things in life rarely come from grand plans or perfect timing. They come from small acts of love, from moments of humility, from the courage to say I'm sorry and the grace to accept it's okay. The man who owned Elysium hadn't just changed James's career. He'd reminded him and everyone who heard the story that kindness isn't weakness. That seeing someone really seeing them can be the most powerful gift of all. And James, he wasn't going to waste it. He'd build something worthy of that night, something that honored not just the opportunity, but the humanity behind it. Because in the end, it was never about the VIP table. It was about who you become when someone believes in you, even when you don't yet believe in yourself. Life has a funny way of circling back, not with a bang, but with a quiet echo that reminds you how far you've come. For James and Lena, that echo came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, 6 months after the night that changed everything. James was sitting in a small conference room at the downtown office, not the converted warehouse space anymore, but a proper suite in a building with glass walls and a view of the river. He'd just wrapped up a call with a logistics team in Chicago, walking them through the latest updates to TrackFlow. The app was now live in 17 states, used by over 200 small and mid-sized delivery companies. Drivers sent him thank you notes. Warehouse managers reported fewer delays, less stress, more sleep. It wasn't perfect, but it was working, and it was helping real people. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. The part-time role had turned into something more substantial. He still kept his warehouse job 2 days a week, not because he had to, but because he didn't want to lose touch with the ground truth. But most of his time now was spent here, shaping the next phase of the project, mentoring new team members, even giving input on hiring. His phone buzzed. A message from Lena. Got home early. Made soup, come when you can. He smiled. Some things never changed. She still made soup when she wanted to take care of him. As he packed up his laptop, his gaze fell on a framed photo on his desk. Nothing fancy, just a printout someone had taken at the industry conference. Him at the podium, mid-sentence, hand raised slightly like he was making a point. Behind him, the TrackFlow logo glowed on the screen. He'd almost thrown it away, thinking it was too boastful, but Lena had insisted they frame it. Not because you're famous, she'd said. Because you showed up. He tucked the laptop into his bag and headed out. That evening, over steaming bowls of lentil soup and crusty bread, Lena brought up something she'd been thinking about. I want to write about that night, she said quietly. James looked up from his bowl. The Elysium night? She nodded. Not to name anyone. Not to make it dramatic, just to share what it taught us. About assumptions. About grace. About how a single moment of kindness can ripple out in ways you never expect. James set his spoon down. You think people would care? I think they need to hear it, she said. We live in a world that's so quick to judge, so quick to assume the worst or the usual about people based on how they look. That night showed us how wrong we can be, and how healing it is when someone chooses understanding over shame. He thought about it. He'd told the story a few times to his team, to new hires, but always in private. Putting it out there felt vulnerable. What if people thought he was bragging? What if they misunderstood? But then he remembered the man's words. Just notice it. That's enough. Maybe sharing it could help someone else notice their own blind spots too. Okay, James said. But keep it real. No fluff. Just what happened, Lena smiled. That's all I want to do. She wrote it that weekend. Not as a viral post, not as a performance, just as a letter to the world, typed late at night after her shifts at the clinic. She didn't mention names, not even the owners. She called him the man who owned the place. She described the panic, the silence, the quiet dignity of his response. She wrote about the shame of realizing her own assumptions, and the deeper lesson that excellence doesn't wear a uniform, and success doesn't look one certain way. She posted it on a public blog she rarely used, shared it on her personal social media with a simple caption. Sometimes the most powerful moments begin with a mistake. She didn't expect much, maybe a few likes from friends, a comment or two. By Monday morning, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The post had been shared, first by a local journalist who saw it, then by a nonprofit focused on economic equity, then by a major news outlet. People were calling it a masterclass in humility and humanity. Others said it made them reflect on their own biases. Truck drivers, nurses, teachers, small business owners, hundreds of people commented with their own stories of being underestimated, of moments when someone saw them when no one else did. James watched it unfold with a mix of awe and discomfort. He didn't like the attention, but Lena handled it with grace, responding to comments with kindness, redirecting praise to the larger message. Then came the interview requests. She turned down most of them. But when a national morning show asked, not for drama, but for a conversation about implicit bias and everyday dignity, she agreed on one condition. James had to be there too. He groaned. I hate cameras. I know, she said, squeezing his hand. But this isn't about us. It's about the lesson. So they went. They sat on a soft couch under bright lights, surrounded by microphones and cameras, and told their story simply, honestly, no embellishment, no anger, just truth. Afterward, the host asked, "What would you say to the man who owned the place if you could?" Lena looked at James, then back at the camera. Thank you for seeing us, and for reminding the world that ownership, excellence, and generosity come in all forms, James added. And thank you for proving that the most powerful thing you can do with your success is lift someone else up. The segment aired the next day. It was shared millions of times, but the real impact wasn't in the views or the headlines. It was in the quiet moments that followed. A warehouse manager in Ohio emailed James, saying he'd started weekly listening circles with his team after reading the post. A high school teacher in Texas used the story in her social studies class to talk about bias and empathy. A young black entrepreneur messaged Lena to say the post gave her the courage to pitch her idea to investors, who kept doubting her. And then, one afternoon, a plain envelope arrived at their apartment. No return address. Inside was a check, substantial but not outrageous, and a note, for the community health clinic. Keep healing people. A friend, Lena cried when she saw it. She knew who it was from. She didn't cash the check right away. She framed it instead, hanging it in the clinic's staff lounge with a small plaque. Kindness in action. She never confirmed it publicly. She didn't need to. As for the man who owned the place, he stayed out of the spotlight just as he always had. No interviews. No statements. But James heard through David that he'd quietly doubled his annual donations to programs supporting black entrepreneurs and vocational training in logistics. He'd also started a new initiative, Reserved Tables, a mentorship program that paired industry leaders with frontline workers who had ideas but no access. James was asked to help design it. He said yes. 1 year after that birthday night, James and Lena found themselves back at Elysium, not as guests, but as invited speakers at a small private event about innovation and inclusion. The lounge looked the same velvet booths, the same glittering view. But everything felt different. They were shown to a table near the window, not the VIP booth, but a quiet corner one. As they sat down, James noticed a small card tucked under Lena's water glass. He picked it up. It read, "Happy birthday again. The owner." Lena's eyes filled with tears. She tucked the card into her purse like a treasure. Later that evening, as they stood on the rooftop terrace watching the city lights, James put his arm around her. "Remember how nervous we were last time we were here?" he said. She leaned into him. "I remember how small I felt, like we didn't belong. And now?" he asked. "Now I know we belong everywhere," she said softly. "Not because we earned a fancy seat, but because we showed up as ourselves and someone saw us." James nodded. That was the real gift. Not the opportunity, not the career shift, not even the recognition. It was the reminder that dignity isn't given, it's recognized. And once you see it in others, you start to see it in yourself. Life went on. Track flow expanded. James eventually transitioned fully into his new role, but he never forgot the warehouse floor. He made sure every new feature was tested by real workers in real conditions. Lena continued her work at the clinic, now leading a wellness program for essential workers, funded in part by the donations that followed her post. They didn't become rich overnight. They still argued about whose turn it was to take out the trash. They still ate takeout on tired nights. But something fundamental had shifted inside them. A quiet confidence, a deeper empathy, a belief that small moments matter. And every year, on Lena's birthday, they returned to Elysium. Not because they needed to prove anything, but because it was their reminder that grace exists, that change is possible, that sometimes the most powerful words aren't "you're fired" or "you're hired," but simply, "I own this place," and spoken not to exclude, but to include. Years later, when their daughter asked how they met, James would smile and say, "We've always known each other, but we really saw each other on a rooftop under city lights when a stranger chose kindness over pride." And that, more than any title or table, was the story they wanted to pass on.